Thank you. Alrighty. So we're going to talk about root causes today, but since I only have 10 minutes, I wanted to start with some stories from a book I'm writing called Bedtime Stories to Put Your Children to Sleep Instantly and Also Yourself. This first story is about leprechauns. Once upon a time, there was a company with a new employee, and one day the employee asked their manager, "Why does everyone suddenly get in their cars as soon as it stops raining?" The manager said, "It's not about when the rain stops, it's about when the rainbow appears." Common sense tells us that rainbows are produced by a pot of gold left on the ground by a leprechaun. Everyone knows this. Just go ask your Irish ancestor from the 11th century. It's in books and stuff. But anyway, so whenever we see a rainbow, our procedure is to trace it back to its source and get the gold. And when we get enough gold, then we can all quit our jobs and we won't have to work anymore. The employee walked away from that conversation thinking, how come everyone's still at work if they've been finding all these pots of gold? The end. Thank you. Now for a completely different story. Once upon a time, there was a software company with a new employee. And one day the employee asked their manager, "Why does everyone do root cause analysis after an incident?" And the manager said, "Well, common sense tells us that every incident has a root cause." And everyone knows this. Just ask people in the industry. It's in books and stuff. But anyway, whenever we have an incident, our procedure is to ask the 5 whys. Why? Why did this happen to us? And that allows us to trace the incident back to its root cause so that we can eliminate it. And once we've eliminated all the root causes, we won't have any incidents anymore. The employee walked away from this conversation thinking, how come we have so many incidents if we've been eliminating root causes this whole time? The end. So thanks for listening to my stories, book coming soon. Now I'll get on with my talk, Leprechauns, Root Causes, and Other Fairy Tales. This talk's largely based on a well-known paper called How Complex Systems Fail by Richard Cook. Let me just move this off my screen. There we go. It's only 3 pages long, so I'd encourage everyone here to give it a read. And while making this talk, I found out that someone's turned it into a website, how.complexsystems.fail, which is nice. Whenever you hear me say complex system in this talk, think of something like a bank or a large system of software. Let's look at a few points that the paper makes. Complex systems are intrinsically hazardous systems. What this is basically saying is that incidents arise from complexity. It doesn't matter how many root causes you fix. If you have a sufficiently complex system, there will always be problems. Complex systems run in degraded mode. So if complexity is the cause of problems, then you would expect complex systems to be constantly experiencing problems. And that is exactly what you find when you look at any complicated system. Major incidents might be rare, but minor failures are happening all the time. Complex systems are heavily and successfully defended against failure. So if they're constantly having all these problems, you would expect them to grind to a halt and die, but they don't. And that's because every complex system has a multitude of defenses that protect it from small localized failures cascading into major system-wide failures. So every complex system has these, and they wouldn't be able to exist if they didn't have them. Catastrophe requires multiple failures. Single-point failures are not enough. So if they have all these defenses against problems, how come major incidents are still possible? And that's because each individual layer of defense is not perfect. When one layer fails, usually it gets caught by a different layer, but sometimes a problem will slip through several layers of defense before getting caught. So to get a really nasty major incident, you have to have several failures all line up perfectly to allow that to slip through. And that kind of brings us to the heart of this talk. So I'm going to read verbatim from the paper at this point. Post-accident attribution to a root cause is fundamentally wrong. Because overt failure requires multiple faults, there is no isolated cause of an accident. There are multiple contributors to accidents. Each of these is necessarily insufficient in itself to create an accident. Only jointly are these causes sufficient to create an accident. Indeed, it is the linking of these causes together that creates the circumstances required for the accident. Thus, no isolation of root cause of an accident is possible. Evaluations based on such reasoning as root cause do not reflect a technical understanding of the nature of failure, but rather the social, cultural need to blame specific localized forces or events for outcomes. The paper goes on to say that views of cause limit the effectiveness of defenses against future events. So when you go hunting for a root cause, you always find one. But the problem is you always find one. And this fulfills the social need to place blame on something, but it doesn't necessarily help to reduce the risk of future incidents. An earlier quote from the paper said that like hazard arises from complexity. And what do we do when we fix a root cause? We fix it by adding new rules, new processes, new checks and guards, in other words, new complexity to the system. So ironically, every time we try to fix a root cause and reduce our risk, we may accidentally be increasing our risk by adding complexity. I want to leave a couple of things with you from this talk. The paper says the social need to blame, but I think scapegoating is like a punchier term. So whenever you hear someone say root cause, you can take that part of the sentence, replace it with the word scapegoat, and it will still make sense. I guarantee that the sentence will still make sense. And it should give you a new perspective on the conversation you're having as well. I didn't have time to talk about good alternatives, but I would recommend Swiss cheese. You can Google the Swiss cheese bottle of accident causation or just come talk to me later. And if you take anything from this talk, I hope it's this. Root causes are like leprechauns, fun to think about, but completely fictional. Thank you.